Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a super simple but really powerful strategy from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. We're going to break down exactly how you can make your good habits stick, not just for a week or a month, but for good.
So let's jump right in with a question that sounds kind of like a riddle, right? Well, believe it or not, it's a true story about a young stockbroker who used this exact method to achieve some pretty incredible success, starting with literally nothing.
Okay, so meet Trent Dyrsmid. He's just 23 years old, working at this small bank out in a Canadian suburb, far from all the big city action. Honestly, nobody was expecting this guy to make waves. But he had a system.
And his method was just brilliantly simple. Every single morning, he'd start with 120 paper clips in one jar. For every sales call he made, boom, he'd move one clip over to the other jar. His goal was crystal clear. Don't stop dialing until that first jar is empty. He made his progress something he could see, something he could feel. He made it impossible to ignore.
And the results of this super simple system? They were absolutely staggering. In just 18 months, Dyrsmid's daily habit brought in $5 million to his firm. By the time he was 24, he was earning a six-figure salary, and it was all thanks to 2 jars and a handful of paper clips.
So what Trent Dyrsmid figured out is a technique called habit tracking. And it's not complicated at all. It's really just about creating a visual, undeniable record of what you've done. It's about proving to yourself, day in and day out, that you're putting in the work.
You know, the legendary comedian Jerry Seinfeld uses the exact same idea for writing jokes. His goal isn't to write a brilliant, hilarious joke every single day. Nope. His only goal is to write something every day, to put a big X on the calendar and to not break that chain.
So what's really going on here? What's the psychology behind why this is so effective? Well, habit tracking taps into 3 of James Clear's big laws of behavior change. It makes your habit obvious, attractive, and satisfying. Let's break down each one of those.
All right, first up, tracking makes your habit obvious. It puts it right there, front and center, so it's incredibly hard to just forget about it or, ignore it.
That chain of X's on your calendar or those paper clips moving from one jar to another, that's a powerful visual cue. It's also a great way to keep yourself honest. We all kind of like to think we're doing better than we actually are, right? But the data? Well, the data doesn't lie. And get this, one study found that people who just kept a daily food log lost twice as much weight as people who didn't. The simple act of tracking is what sparked the change.
Okay, next, let's talk about motivation. Because tracking doesn't just remind you what to do, it actually makes you want to do it.
It turns out the most effective form of motivation isn't some big speech or reward. It's just progress. Every time you mark that X or move that paper clip, you get this little hit of achievement. And that streak, as it gets longer and longer, becomes something you don't want to lose. That feeling is so powerful on those days when you just don't feel like it. You look at that chain and you think, man, I've come too far to stop now.
And that brings us to the third benefit, which James Clear says is the most crucial one of all. Tracking makes the habit immediately satisfying.
And here's why that's so important. Most good habits have a delayed reward, right? You don't get a six-pack after one trip to the gym. But moving that paper clip, that gives you a tiny bit of immediate pleasure. It makes you feel successful right now. You start focusing on just keeping the streak alive. And before you know it, the long-term results just start to take care of themselves. Okay, so this all sounds great in a perfect world. But let's be real. Life is not perfect. You get sick, you have to travel, an emergency pops up out of nowhere. Every single streak eventually comes to an end. But that does not have to mean your habit is over.
This right here, this is the single most important rule to remember for when you inevitably slip up. It's simple, it's powerful, and it is the key to getting back on track. I want you to look at it this way. Missing one time is an accident. It happens to everybody. But missing a second time in a row? Oh, that's different. That's the start of a brand new and probably bad habit. See, the first mistake is never the one that ruins you. It's the spiral of repeated mistakes that follow. That's what does the real damage.
You can think about your progress like money. Avoiding a bad day, a day where you lose ground, is often even more important than having a good day. A single missed workout, that's a small loss you can recover easily. But a second and then a third missed day, that creates this negative momentum that just eats away at all your hard-earned progress way faster than you think.
And that is why just showing up, especially on your worst days, is so critical. Maybe you only have the energy to go to the gym for 5 minutes. Look, that 5 minutes isn't going to transform your body. But what it does do is reaffirm your identity. It's you casting a vote for being the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And that identity, that's what's going to carry you for the long haul.
Okay, one last very important point before we wrap up. Because as powerful as tracking is, we have to be really careful we don't fall into a super common measurement trap.
It's a principle called Goodhart's Law, and what it basically means is that when a measure becomes the main target, it stops being a good measure. We get so obsessed with hitting the number that we lose sight of the actual reason we started in the first place. The metric becomes the goal, instead of just being a guy.
And we've all seen this happen, right? An employee focuses on logging more hours, not on doing better work. Or we get obsessed with hitting 10,000 steps, even if it means just walking in circles in the living room, instead of focusing on being healthy. The point is, we optimize for what we measure, so we better make sure we're measuring the right thing.
So, let's boil this all down. What are the key takeaways? First, use visual tracking to make your progress real and tangible. Remember, it works because it makes the habit obvious, attractive, and satisfying. And maybe most important of all, live by that simple rule: never miss twice. Get back on track immediately.
And that leaves us with one final question. And this one's for you to think about. What's the one habit in your life that you're going to start tracking starting today? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.